Ed Franklin with the Ed Franklin No Limits podcast. You can always contact me at edfranklin.nolimits@gmail.com. And I know I haven't been here as much as I was in the past, but we're getting back on track to do my weekly podcast. We have a guest today named Mavis Lamb. She's awesome. You can't wait to hear her. But just a second, every October, I almost said celebrate. That's not what I do the breast cancer awareness, because I have 7 daughters and I have a mom and all those things. And I know people who've been afflicted by this. And I always want to remind you, gentlemen out there, that men can get breast cancer too. I have a friend whose husband got breast cancer, and every day should be cancer awareness across the US and the world. But, I happen to like the color pink, and the NFL does it and all that. So I always, respect all these people that have gone through this. So with that being said, Mavis, I met Mavis through Deborah Sweet, who was on my podcast a while back. And we had a phone conversation a couple of weeks ago and just seemed to hit it off. We have a lot of ideas in common and things like that. And so, Mavis, thank you again for being on. Welcome to my podcast. Trying to get more listeners. You people like you help me, because you have a lot of connections and things like that. So welcome to my podcast.
Thank you so much. I am thrilled to be here. And I was so excited when you mentioned breast cancer awareness that you mentioned men, because it is so true. And I think that everybody needs to pay attention. So I appreciate that. And by the way, pink's a good color on you. It's good in your background.
Well, we have a rodeo in Poway every year, and I've been going to it for 25 years. And it used to be tough enough to wear pink was Friday night, right? And my wife says I'm one of those people I can wear any color, and I'm tough enough and big enough to wear pink. I was at the dentist a while back, and someone said, "Oh, that looks good on you. You don't mind wearing pink?" I said, "Who's going to tell me not to wear pink? I mean, I know
Right.
I don't mind it." And I usually have to have a pink hat on, but I'll have that on more. So Mavis, when we spoke on the phone, you have a fascinating background, and why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do and what you've done? Where you really connected with me when you talked about videos.
Oh, yes.
So tell me a little bit about that.
So I love to say I got my background in film and video production, and I made and produced music videos way back when MTV and VH1 actually showed music videos, which is, I won't say how many years ago that was. But that's where I kind of came into the production industry and the storytelling aspect of it, and just had a blast. I started my career in Los Angeles. I say it was the decade. I spent about 3 years there, and it was the longest 3 years, but I learned a lot. And then I moved on to Nashville, Tennessee, because I started doing country music videos and had a blast there, and started getting into more script writing and storytelling and other types of video production, and ended up in Seattle, Washington, and worked with Women in Film Seattle out there for a while, and did all kinds of stuff. And then I took kind of the storytelling part of it and shifted into some marketing copy. That back when everybody used to have a brochure, then everybody had to have a website, and it has evolved as technology and things evolve. But for me, the one thing that has always held true is the story. If there's not a story to tell, then there's no reason for somebody to listen to you.
Well, I told you on our phone conversation. So the No Limits podcast is about getting over limitations, telling your story, getting over excuses, because I can make an excuse for anything.
Absolutely.
And self-confidence, because I think it's at our lowest in the history of the world. I think our self-esteem, especially for young people, is very low. And with the new things going on in politics, it's going to get lower, because it's just not being sure of what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
The storytelling, I did a couple podcasts on that, just telling, everybody has 2 stories in their life, in my opinion, that you can dwell on all the bad stuff when you grew up, and how you got to where you're at, or you can tell all the things that you learned and got all the positive things out. Now, we obviously don't want to tell that bad story to every, Tom, Dick, and Harry that we run into, but I think, as being in sales for the last 35 years, storytelling is important when you're selling, right?
Yeah.
And you just say you did some coaching too? You do coaching for?
I do. I'm actually as far as the writing and the storytelling, I do ghostwriting and coaching to help people tell their story. What I really do is I'm an intuitive, and I help people kind of see, I shine a light on what's getting in their way. And sometimes they know what it is, but sometimes they don't.
Mhm.
And I think of the story, don't hide your light under a bushel basket, right? And sometimes we put that bushel basket on ourselves. Sometimes somebody else has put on it, so we don't even know it's there.
Right.
And so it just helped people kind of say, hey, let's take that off. Let's let you shine and tell your story and stand in who you really are.
So I had a friend of mine that was an insurance agent, and I used to talk to her about a lot about this, because she said, you know what, there's so many insurance people out there. She's a farmer's agent, so many farmers agents. But the difference with you is you worked with your dad and took it over, and then after he passed away, you continued. Now your son works there.
Yeah.
I said, you need to get the message out that you're a mom and a daughter and a wife and all these other things, and you're in the insurance business, because it brings credibility, right? It's the marketing piece of your thing. So I think that's really cool that you do that. And those videos told a story, right? So when you go back to that, I always thought in my mind, sometimes I'll hear a song and I can come up with kind of a video in my mind of how I was growing up during that song or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
really cool. So did you work with a lot of superstars? And you don't need to name drop. Did you work on that end with
I
those
did.
people? Okay.
I kind of was the backside of it. I was the one that kind of helped hold all the pieces together and make
Yeah.
sure we got from point A to point B. But with that, I got to work with and meet some amazing people. In the pop industry is where I started,
Oh,
pop
cool.
and top 40 type, like the stuff that was on MTV and VH1, and then shifted into country music, and met some amazing people there. And so yeah, I did get to meet some amazing people, and I was always just the people that were real weren't always the ones that you would expect to be the most real.
Yeah.
The superstars weren't always the ones with the entourage and all that. Sometimes it was the people that you didn't expect that. I mean, it was kind of opposites. And I loved that. I loved my favorite. We used to do a lot of superstar videos in country music where we invite everybody in to come play along. So we had just a room full of people, and it was a lot of coordinating. And I remember they asked Reba McEntire if she would come be in this video. And she said, I would be glad to, but I don't want to be a singer. Let me be the waitress. Like,
Oh,
she just
nice.
wanted to be humble,
Yeah.
and walk around and chew gum and act like she was taking everybody's drink order and stuff. And I just love that about her. And look at her today, she's just the megastar, and you wouldn't expect that, but that's how she was.
Yeah. Yeah. That's cool. So I don't want to get off on that, because
Yeah, that's a
I
whole
could
nother.
probably talk to you for an hour about that, but I want to get back to the coaching. So
Yeah,
do you have more women or men clients?
I would say it's about 50
Oh,
50.
interesting. Okay.
Yeah, it really, really is. And I would say that most women, I think, feel they have a story, but they need to be encouraged. And most men, and this is just, you know,
In general.
generalization, they know they have a story, but maybe they don't have the time to get into the details of telling it. They're more schedule related, and like, I just don't have time to do it. I just need you to help me. Whereas the women might be a little bit more, I need a little emotional support to tell my story, to feel brave enough to tell my story.
That's interesting. So I said I had 7 daughters. We just had our 19th grandchild yesterday. I know, it's crazy, and they're about even on men and girls and boys. But my oldest daughter is very business person, very good business person, and she's very tall and blonde, and she works in an industry that has a lot of men. It's in government down south in Louisiana, and she was commenting on that she didn't feel like she was getting the respect.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's part of that's the culture she's in, but part of it's just a broad culture, just in the US or in the
Yeah.
world, maybe. So I've always had good luck with women supervisors, owners, managers, customers, client, whatever. But I think it's my attitude going in, is I don't have any preconceived notion
Mm-hmm.
just because it's a girl, right?
Right.
Or a woman. And I have to encourage her. It's one of those things where she'll say something, and then another guy will say it. No, hey, good idea, Jim. And well, Samantha just said it, kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I was wondering if you get that sense that women aren't as confident sometimes in just in business in general.
I- that can be the truth. I think
Yeah.
that when it comes relate to this, because sales, we're all in sales no matter what we do,
Of
because we
course.
have to get a client, close a
Sound
client,
like
do the
my
project,
clone sometimes.
right?
You
That's a
say
whole other
things like that. Yeah.
topic. But what I have found is that it comes down to relationships, and women are better at building the relationship, and men tend to be better at making the deal. You got to do both.
Sure.
And sometimes women are a little less they don't want to be pushy, they don't want to come across too tough, so they keep baby stepping into it and building the relationship and building the relationship. And men sometimes skip that part and just say, let's do business. And so I think the best is the balance of the two.
Yeah.
But I think that that's even true in stories, in telling your story. And I loved what you said about sales, because it popped something in my head where when I was doing marketing writing, and even today, it's like, if somebody doesn't know why you do what you do, they assume it's for the money, because that's the only common denominator. So when you can tell your story, this is why I do what I do, this is how I got here, this is why I have the type of clients I do, this is what, then people, like you said, then they can relate to you. And it may not be, everybody's not going to be your client. That's okay. Everybody shouldn't be.
Yeah,
But the
you don't want
people
all the
that connect
business.
to, people that connect to your story and relate to you and can identify with that, then those are going to be the better clients for you anyway. So tell your story.
So I tell, I've been doing this for a long time, and what I find is that I'll tell salespeople, young people especially, when you're headed to an account, first of all, qualify the account.
Yes.
Don't go try to sell men's shoes to women, because it's just they're probably not going to buy them. So they just become a lost statistic. Excuse me, I'm gonna choke here. But I said, go into that meeting as I'm going to meet a new friend, right? I'm going to learn about somebody new. I'm going to find out what their story is. I'm going to share my story. Takes the pressure off of the sale, right?
Yeah.
Then once they're comfortable, now they're going to start bleeding out to you more than likely. They're still going to tell you about these problems they have. Excuse me, I'm sorry. And then that's where you can jump on that problem, right? Oh, we can handle that. This is what we've done in the past. We've been doing this for a long time. And I get a lot of, first of all, the worst salesmen are the ones that don't follow up, and we have a lot of those out there. But then secondly, when they do follow up, they're just wanting to sell, like just close that deal right away.
Yep.
And that's not necessarily what that customer wants.
Yeah, it's so true. I was just thinking about like business conferences and conventions where you get all these people and everybody goes because they think, oh, I'm going to go and I'm going to make a lot of contacts, I'm going to close a lot of business. And one of the greatest equalizers you can do is say, how many of you people, you got the crowd together, how many of you here came to sell something or get a new client? Every hand in the room goes up.
Yeah.
I go, okay, great. How many of you came here to buy something or become a client? No hands go up, because that's skipping the step. Like you said, you got to connect.
Yeah.
And you've got to build that relationship, and that becomes part of the story. And I love a great way to get into somebody's story and talking about their problems, when whatever they talk about, whatever they're going through, how's your day, what's your big project, what do you got on your calendar, then ask them, well, who's helping you with that? And the first what? Well, who's helping you with that? Now, it may mean I have a referral for you, I have somebody that can help, or it may just mean you shouldn't be doing this alone. Who's your sounding board? Who's your mastermind group? Whatever it is. And those kinds of questions help people open up about what's really going on. And of course, we all know sales, it's all problem solving.
100%.
You don't want to buy a mattress, you want a better night's sleep. That whole spiel, right? Like, people have problems and you want to help solve them.
Well, and that kind of takes me to that marketing piece where I went to work for a company once, and the owner says, I said, well, what does your son do? He says he's a sales and marketing person. I said, that's two different jobs, right? Marketing is more of an operational job. Sales is kind of a relationship. And I said, they can hurt each other if you do them the wrong way, right? Marketing is about credibility. Right. It's that introduction to that, your wife, right? It's not, you can't walk up to your wife before you know her in a bar and she's like, no, get away from me, you weirdo. Someone comes to her and says, Ed's a good guy, he does this and that, but That's the marketing piece, right? That's the
Mhm.
credibility part where now the guard comes down and says, oh no, I'd be interested, if that's what he's into or whatever,
Yeah.
good stuff. And that credibility is important. And that's where helping with that problem. Look, we've done jobs like this before. So I'm in a moving business. And what my thing, I always get that, well, what's your hourly rate? I said, let's not worry about that yet. Let's figure, what are you trying to do? Right.
Yeah.
I just want a job that I kind of didn't think I was going to get because I thought the guy's budget was too small. And I don't really discuss pricing when I'm
Mhm.
at that sales piece. I'm trying to figure out what he wants. Tell me what you want, and I can tell you if we can do it or not.
Right.
And we ended up almost doubling the cost of the move, but he's got all of his problems taken care of, right? He doesn't have to
Right.
get involved anymore.
Right.
And I was talking to someone said to me yesterday, Ed, why don't you coach sales? I said, because first of all, the class would last 10 minutes. If the people would listen, I could write a sales book in one page. There's 10
Right.
things to do in sales. It's all you get. It's not that difficult. We overthink sales. But if you go online and put in sales classes or sales training or whatever, you get about 4 million hits on
Mhm.
the webs on a thing. And I know they're not all good at it. So yeah, I mean, I've been doing this a long time, and it's just so that it's like I don't act like I need the business anymore. Of course I need the
Mhm.
business. I need to eat. But if I don't get that customer, it's all right. There's another customer.
Exactly.
And but you're absolutely right. And this is what kind of goes back to our conversation originally when we talked, is about COVID and how I just think everything changed after COVID. And everybody's like, no, it's back to normal. I said, no, it is not back to
No, it
normal.
isn't.
And you agreed with me.
Yes.
And let's talk about that a little bit, because I'm starting to rethink how I'm even networking anymore, because the wrong people are showing up.
Right.
And
Right.
I don't know what happened.
It's probably a little different for everybody,
Sure.
but there was such a an immediate shutdown of the norm of how we did business, how we met new people, how we networked, how we got new clients. Whatever it was we were doing, it all changed.
Right.
And I remember when it first started, and people were like, Zoom, what is that? Like, sure, some people had it, but a lot of people didn't. They may have had something, but it wasn't the same. And people began to first of all, we just shut down altogether. We didn't want to talk to anybody. We didn't want to go anywhere. I mean, unless it was somebody you already knew, you were like, you may stay your 6 feet away. You
Yeah.
may make it 12.
And I
I'm
think that
okay with
changed a lot with
that.
people that used to see each other all the time, don't see each other now.
Yeah, they just
Yeah.
it just shifted. And then people, and I don't know exactly what happened, but it's almost like people forgot how to connect to people. They
Yeah.
forgot how to build that relationship. And what do you mean I have to see you in real life? What do you mean I have to be in the same room with you? I don't know what to say anymore. It was this whole thing of people, all of a sudden everybody was on Facebook or TikTok or whatever your social media platform of choice was, but there was this barrier, and you could say whatever you wanted or not. You could be a stalker and just observe. You could put in a shot and disappear. I'm going to
Yeah.
say something really mean and watch what happens. And people forgot for lack of a better phrase, the niceties life. They forgot how to each other. And we got too focused on our differences, as
Oh,
if
I
they
agree.
didn't exist before.
Well, that was the political landscape too, which
Yes,
is still happening now.
it is still happening. And I think that people got really comfortable in, I only want to be, and when you were online, you could easily be in the world of your echo chamber. You didn't have to connect with anybody who didn't have anything different to bring to the table other than what you already had. And people got really comfortable with that.
Mhm.
And I don't remember who first said it, so I'm not going to be able to give credit, but there was sort of this concept of people began to think freedom of speech meant freedom from speech, so that I don't have to listen to you. Well, that's fine, but they took it to, I can also then shut you down. And then you take that into the business world, and you take that into people having to go to work and work in the cubicle situation.
Yeah.
And they now have to actually offer classes, these bigger corporations, in office etiquette, because they have lost the
I feel
ability.
like nobody ever cared what I believed back before COVID.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, they just like, oh, that's Ed. I didn't have to give them a political resume
Yeah.
in order to be their friend, right? And I
Hmm.
have a good friend, I'm going to breakfast with him on Friday, that we are about, about both ends out on politics,
Right.
but we get along fine because it's just not something we bring up.
Mm-hmm.
I don't disagree with them on some stuff. I just came up in a different environment.
Right.
Just have a different viewpoint on some of those things.
That's
Just
all it
like I have
is.
all these kids, people are like, well, I don't like kids. Well, that's your business. I don't care. You know,
That's your life. That's okay.
right. But
Yeah.
you're right. I think that well, and then I think then you couple that again with millennials who grew up with these phones in their hand,
Mm-hmm.
who already are struggling a little bit possibly with social skills.
Mm-hmm.
And then we peppered the COVID in too. Yeah, I can see exactly what you're saying. I think you're
Yeah.
100% right.
They just, some of them never got the skill set,
Yeah.
because it was always, the phone in the, and I was like this, and I could be some of the most amazing things in the world. You'd be out in a restaurant and there's a table of, four or more people, and every single one of them is on their phone.
I know.
And you're like, are you texting each other or doing something completely different? Like, why are you here together if you don't want to be together? And I think that also people like that whole, don't share your story type thing comes back into play with, I always assume anytime I'm in a group of people that half of them think differently than me. And some of
Oh,
them, like you said, 180 degrees different. Some are with me, some are here, some are, and if you know that, then okay, that's just the way it is. It's just like how people learn differently or think differently. Some people want to hear it, some people want to see it, some people want to write it down or read it or whatever. We all are different. And what has happened is and I don't know if it's necessarily true, but it's perceived as true that if I voice an opinion or tell a story
mhm.
that is different from someone, I'm going to get shut down. And I think that has had an impact in people being able to just stand and tell their story. Your story doesn't have to be for everybody else. Whatever your experience, if you're selling a product or a service, if you're doing, you want to tell your story for business, or if you just want to tell your story for personal reasons,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter how many other people like your story. If you touch one other person, that's enough.
Sure.
But we have kind of gotten to the point where we're afraid to do that because we've become fearful. And I take that back to you. We're afraid to let our light shine. We're afraid, and you don't have to shout it from the rooftop. You don't have to shove it down anybody's throat. You can just stand and shine.
Yep. No, I agree with that. My I was telling this person I was talking to yesterday about sales. I had this customer. This guy was just a tyrant, right? When he was not to me, but I could see how he interacted with other people. He was definitely a poison in their company, right? But I have to call on him directly. And I remember one day going in and I said, he was starting to get wound up, not at me again around what was going on, but I got to encourage him to buy something, right? Or was telling him about a product or something. And I saw he had a picture of these two little redhead twins on his wall. And I said, are those your kids? And he's like, his whole demeanor changed.
Boom.
Right now he's telling me about his kids and what they do and about their mom and all this stuff. And then I have been friends with this guy now. His kids are like my kids' age, like in their 30s. And I'll say, hey, how are the boys doing? Oh man, they're doing good. They started bowling and whole different demeanor. And we ended up being very good friends. And I didn't see him having a lot of those people around. And I'm always encouraging salespeople, look around the guy's office or the gal's office. You can tell it. They might have fishing pictures up. Like I don't fish, but I'm glad to ask somebody, oh, do you do that a lot?
Yeah.
I fish at Costco, right? That's the easy way. It's all clean and
Yeah, right. Ready to go.
But I find that most people like to talk about themselves. And if you can
Yep.
ask them, if you can figure something out and find it, and I listen to enough politics and sports and stuff that I can stay in a conversation. I don't really follow all that, but enough to, you be aware. You got to be a little bit, worldly if you're out there selling a little bit at
Yes.
least.
Yeah.
But that story thing. So let's go back to that for a second because you said something. Do you think people sometimes want to tell the bad part of their story because they think it's important?
Yes.
Okay.
I think that if it's important to them, it's important. That doesn't mean that everybody else needs to hear it all the time, or that may not be your lead in. But I feel like, and I mean this with all due respect to people that have traumas in their life, because there are real traumatic, horrible things that can happen to people.
Yes.
But it's become, unfortunately, the word trauma has become so overused that people say, well, that's a trauma trigger. When I'm like, well, they just told you no. They didn't, that we have lost the inability a little bit to differentiate between a bad incident and trauma.
That's a very good point. And I talk about this on my podcast a lot, that I want to do more public speaking. And one of the setups for this is that you've either had, you're having, or you're going to have some kind of trauma in your life, right?
Yes.
And it can't even, it's not even, it has to happen to you. It can happen in and around you, and it can affect you, right? It can affect your kids and things like that. You still have to deal with that. And I don't think that if you're going to hire a coach, or you're going to go to real estate school, or you're going to do all these things, if you're not the best version of yourself, your ability to learn is lessened if you have this trauma going on, or your ability to, because we're all I don't know if you have kids, but we're either taking care of kids, parents, siblings, employees. We're all probably nurturing somebody, especially people that have the guts to come on and do what we're doing right now.
Right.
We're probably in charge of somebody at some level. I don't mean that in a bad way. I'm just saying it's just typically, I kind of feel like that's, we're not shy, right? We can get out and talk. And if you don't address that, you're going to have a harder time taking care of, and then you're going to have a harder time taking care of yourself.
Right.
So about 8 weeks ago, I started getting up at 4 a.m, going to the gym. I kept listening to these guys talk and say, this is life-changing and everything. I said, okay, I'm going to try it. It is life-changing, by the way, for me.
Yeah.
Because it's my time. Nobody's around. Well, the people at the gym are around more than you'd think, by the way, if you don't do that. And it's very good time for me to reflect on my story, to change my story, to alter it, to do whatever I have to do. And it's really, and then no one needs anything from me while I'm there.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And I think my goal is to get people to start being a little selfish and start thinking of themselves. Ultimately, it's the most unselfish thing to do, because the higher they're operating, higher level they're operating, the better they can take care of those other people and earn money and do all those things they need to do.
And do all those wonderful things that you have to do and you want to do, then you get to do. Like, we've talked about that before. I have to do something, or I get to do something. And it's the same thing, but the wording changes your perspective. And I feel like people that are good at taking care of others, whether it's kids, people at work, spouses, parents, doesn't matter. We do that because that's who we are, but we have to stop. And it isn't selfish to say, I got to have some downtime.
Yeah.
I've got to have whatever this window is. And it's going to be different for different people. For some people, getting up at 4 a.m, going to work out would be like, well, why are you torturing me? What did I do? Who'd I hurt? But for other people,
I say that to myself sometimes.
Sometimes you do. Well, it's so funny when you talk about that time where you couldn't do anything for anybody else, because a very pampering thing, and I haven't done it in ages since I started working at my husband's bar, but I used to get my nails done. And get acrylics and things on that. And the cool thing about that was, when I had that appointment, it was a twofold thing that I realized. Yes, I was taking a little time. I could not do anything for anybody else while I was getting my nails done. I couldn't even pick up my phone.
Right.
Because my hand, so I got to sit there for an hour or whatever it was and get taken care of. And I used to come in every 2 weeks. And the other thing I noticed in that 2-week window, and it helped me get through the days, was like something was on my mind, something was going on at work, something, and I thought, I don't know how I'm going to get through this. And then all of a sudden, 2 weeks later, I'm getting my nails done and I got through it.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, oh.
It's like it's like a subconscious goal almost in your brain.
It was. And it was sort of like, well, so far my record of getting through bad days, 100%. Oh, okay, here I go, And so it's just, there's a balance that we need to bring to ourselves of, we do have to have some downtime. We do have to have some, and it may be time where we do absolutely nothing, like get your nails done or get a massage, even though you're still doing for yourself.
Yeah.
You're not physically doing it. It may be working out where you're putting in the actual work. It may be taking time to read a book.
That's what my wife
because
does.
you love to
She's the
read,
reader,
but you never have the time anymore.
She'll take that hour before at night. Sometimes at her lunch, she's downstairs right now. She takes a lunch, she eats, and then reads for 15 minutes. That's really her her alone time. And I've
Yeah.
talked about meditation. I think meditation's great. And people go, well, I don't know how to meditate. I say, go online, go onto YouTube, look at meditate. You only got to do it for 5 minutes. I
Yeah.
was something brought tears to my eyes the other day. I don't know what it was, but my grandkids were here and they went, Papa, you cried. I said, are you kidding me? I go in the corner and curl up like a baby and cry sometimes. I mean, sometimes pressure gets so much, you got to just, you know, and I've told people, I've encouraged people, look, just go cry somewhere, go to the beach, whatever, get away just for 5 minutes. It's an emotion, just like anger and everything else. You got to exercise that emotion sometimes, and it won't kill you, right? And it's not a sign of weakness. It's not a sign of any of those things. It's kind of meditative at some level.
Yeah.
And I don't say you just don't do it for any reason, like all you girls do. Just kidding. That was a bad shot. That's a shot at women right there.
Yeah, it was, but we'll let that go.
And but yeah, I think that or I don't know. I don't know if I buy the piece that bleeding out on Facebook is good for that. That I start getting kind of weird on when people start publicly doing that a lot, and it's generally the same people, that will do that. And I'm like, I don't know if that's the best exercise, because you're going to get some resistance, obviously, and maybe that's what they want. I don't know.
I don't know. I feel like there's a time and a place for everything. Too much information is still too much information. And there are people that put maybe it's younger. I don't know, that they're used to doing it and there are no more filters. And I think there are still people that believe that the internet will disappear. Like if I put something on the internet when I was in high school, that's not going to show up again when I'm 25. Well, yeah, it will. It doesn't go away. And so there's that kind of like, when did it become okay to air our dirty laundry in public to people that you don't even know? You don't know who's going to read it. I'm always like, only some things are only for the nearest and dearest. And I believe there are some things that we're going to still hold just quiet in our heart.
Yeah.
I'm going to deal with that one on my own. I'm not going to share that. I had a friend that used to do that. And finally, with this particular friend, I realized that they had a lot of health issues. They couldn't get out. They couldn't do a lot of things. This was their only outlet.
Yeah.
And I'm like, got it.
That's
different
what I'm
minds.
saying. I mean, case by case, obviously, but
Absolutely.
I think maybe some people, I have gone to my kids when all this stuff first started, like in 2000s, right? And I went to my oldest daughter, who's a business person, and said, no, I would take that now off. That was probably a bad call on your part. And it wasn't horrible, but I just said, this is just something, if you're working at a job, this is something no one wants to see.
Right.
And she did. She took it down. She goes, I get it more now. And she understands it more now. She has a 13-year-old daughter. So
yeah,
she understands that. So I'm on social media a lot because I'm usually either promoting my podcast or making videos or talking about 19 grandkids, or we try to keep it pretty positive. And I post something positive every day online, just a positive meme, but I'm stealing and they're not my memes. And when I don't do that for about a week, I get people come back to me, go, Eddie, you all right? I haven't seen any posts, but it's all positive stuff.
Right.
My biggest thing with the podcast, like if I told a lot of my story, I would embarrass a lot of people, right? And not that they did anything, it would expose them to maybe some truth that they don't want to hear. That primarily my kids. Most of my relatives are dead. I can tell stories about them, but so I back off because people say, oh, you should tell that story. I'm like, no, because the kid that's involved in that would be implicated and I don't want to, I'm not going to embarrass them. It's a good story. I could probably get a lot of views that way, but I'm not going to do it at their, at the cost of them.
Right.
So somebody just wrote about this Jada Pinkett Smith person just wrote a book. I know she's a whack job, but now it's starting that ball to roll, which she probably loves because she's in that business, right?
Yep.
Good or bad publicity.
Good or bad. Yeah. She's most celebrities, there's no such thing as bad publicity. I mean, there can be, we have found out, but overall, as long as they're out there, they feel like they're validated because people are talking about them and people are going, well, what did they do? And they're looking into that. But I am with you that people say, well, they'll ask me something about somebody else or whatever. And I'm like, well, that's not my story to tell.
Right.
Exactly. So if you want to talk to them, you may go do that. And it's like I don't know if you're familiar with what Stephen ministry is, but I used to be a Stephen minister and I trained Stephen ministers. And they were lay people who come alongside anybody going through something.
Mm-hmm.
You don't fix it. You're just there. You're a presence. You listen, you pray with them. You're just there. But one of the key things is you never told anyone that I'm so-and-so's Stephen minister. They're going through a divorce, they could say it however they wanted. Oh, Mavis is my Stephen minister. Well, that's up to them. But even if somebody came up to me and said, I just heard from so-and-so that and I'm like, you may talk to them about that. I don't talk about who I help and who I support because that's not what we do. And so
I have a couple of my grandkids had to have some pretty serious trauma, like way worse than I've ever had in my life. And it's hard to make them understand that whatever they tell the therapist is confidential.
Yeah.
Right. They're not going to tell me. And they're like, are you sure? I said, I promise you. They lose their job.
Yeah.
So you can tell them whatever you want. Now, I probably know what they're telling them, but this is where that social media kind of blows out I thought all this was private kind of thing.
Yes.
And that's that, going back to that storytelling, you do have to be careful with what you tell people. You don't want to be starting to cry when you're in a sales meeting because you were telling your story and you've gone overboard and now the person's going, well, what the fuck do I do now? I mean,
right.
This lady's crying in front of me. So you've got to be, aware of how far you're going.
Well, yeah. And I think that also is, if you haven't been telling your story and all of a sudden you do, your emotions are going to be ahead of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you want to use part of your story to talk about why you do what you do or how you help people because you went through something or whatever, you have to tell it enough that you're comfortable just sharing the story. And It's okay. Yeah, you can be emotional. You can take a pause. You can be there emotionally, but your emotions aren't ahead of you where you lose that control. And that comes from getting comfortable with telling your story. And I think that there's that balance. So some people that's why they just don't tell it at all. They don't want to get emotional. They don't want to be vulnerable. Right.
Right. So that's one of the things I've done in this podcast. It's gotten more vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And I get complimented on that at one level. That's it. I mean, I get complimented on it because I am opening him up, saying some things. But I didn't mean to interrupt you. You were on a roll.
No, you're fine. But I think we have to be first vulnerable with ourselves, because sometimes we don't even tell ourselves what we're dealing with. That bushel over your light that I was talking about, sometimes we put it on ourselves, or sometimes somebody else put it, or they put it and we put a weight on top of it, that we tamp down because we have to get through the day, or the messaging was that nobody's going to want to hear your story or believe or whatever it is going on, or you thought you dealt with it and it wasn't a big deal, but that's the thing that keeps coming back and getting in your way. And so you have to first be vulnerable with yourself and just own it. And that's where, whether it's meditation or journaling or just, whatever works for you to help you kind of get comfortable with, this is my story. I can't tell my story if I don't know my story. And so sometimes we have things that block us. And, I was talking about trauma, and sometimes it is a big trauma. Sometimes it's what I call little trauma. And what is amazing sometimes to me is when I work with people, that it's a little thing that one person said to them 20, 30, 40 years ago that just the wall, the door slammed shut, the window came down, whatever it was. And they don't even remember. I mean, they barely remember who said it, but it was there, and they were told something, or they heard something, even if it wasn't because we have our own filters on how we hear what people say. And so you have to get through that and realize, oh, that's why I do what I do, or that's why I do it that way, or don't do it.
I think may have in some people's life been that person that said that thing, right? And they probably took it wrong. They probably shouldn't have given me so much power, right? And I didn't realize how much power they were giving me, kind of thing.
Right.
That's interesting. So I had tell this story about this guy. I wanted to do public speaking. So I found this guy that does a lot of public speaking. I've known him for years. And we sit down and he goes, well, Ed, you've never done anything in your life. What are you going to talk about? And I'm like, well, shit, dude, that was kind of sucked. So I went out and sat in my car and was like, what the hell just happened? I mean, but then I started thinking, and I had to overcome that. I said, he never raised 8 kids. He didn't have 7 daughters. I mean, just that I could talk about for an hour.
Right.
He didn't do this. He didn't do that. Yes, he had done some things bigger than me, but he didn't do a lot of things, the little things that I did in life. I always say Tom Brady couldn't do my life. I couldn't play football, but he couldn't handle my life either.
Exactly.
Doesn't have the skills, but yeah, that's interesting. I often tell people, you have to understand. I tell my kids this: understand that wherever you're at in life, you got yourself there,
Yes.
right? Good and bad.
Mm-hmm.
If you did something, you ate too much or whatever, you gained 50 pounds. Well, you gained the 50 pounds. No one just threw 50 pounds on you, so you're going to have to deal with and unwind that. And
Right.
it's doable. That's what we do. That we do this our whole life. We unwind things from our past, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or I've been married twice before my current wife, and we'll be together 25 years beginning of the year. Well, I wasn't good at it with those 2 women, right? We probably got married too quick or whatever the reason is. But this one works out great. So I always wonder, and you get these Tony Robbins and Jack Canfields and all these guys, and they're all these experts on relationships, and they can tell you, and then they've all been divorced like 4 or 5 times.
Right.
This is the funniest thing in the world. It's got to be one of the hardest things to do in the world is stay married. If it's statistically, it's
Yep.
But it's always funny when an expert is telling me about relationships, and I'm like, and he's like, oh yeah, I was married 3 times. I'm like, well, shit, you're only an expert because you failed twice.
Exactly.
Right?
Just through experience, you had to learn something somewhere along the way.
So let's talk about ghostwriting. This fascinates me. So I am not sure what the definition of a ghostwriter is. Now, if I had a story that I wanted to tell, and I could kind of articulate it to you, and then you would elaborate on it, or how does that work?
There are different levels of ghostwriting. So, for example, I had somebody that kind of had written all their stuff. It was a series of books about nutrition. And so, it wasn't like their life story. It was just how you do what you do. But it was just written so dryly that nobody would ever even want to read it, even though the knowledge was there. So in that case, I come in and I help kind of make it interesting. Let's get a hook to hang all these things on, and let's build this story. So there's that level. There are people that have nothing started, and I do things like I record people, I interview them and I record them because that helps me get their voice, not my voice, and we tell their story. So there's editing stuff, there's kind of writing it together, and then there's just give me your raw data and I'll put it together. The whole thing about ghostwriting is that you don't get credit.
Of course.
Otherwise you're a co-author. And some celebrities, I forget who it was that just had a book coming out that they co-authored with somebody. It was, and some people are okay with that, and some people, they want to make it look like they wrote it. And I will guarantee you, like all these celebrity memoirs, they did not write them themselves. They're their stories, and somebody sat down and interviewed them and put it together, and they approved it, but they don't have the time. And that's like, I always am amazed at these people that are like, they have another book out. I'm like, they got a team of people working with them because just they can't do that and do their job. So sometimes the ghostwriters are just there because you don't have the time it takes.
They kind of learn the person's personality, and they can kind of start being consistent the way they write it. So before Donald Trump was where Donald Trump is now, in like the maybe the 2000s, I read what's the one of the Deal,
or The Art of the Deal.
Yes. So I got the Audible book because I used to travel a lot, and I was going to say, well, I'll just drive and read it. And he did not talk in the book. Some other guy did it.
Sure.
The book made it book terrible because the guy was kind of trying to act like Donald Trump at some level and try to be emotional. And it was so bad. I'm like, Jesus, I should have read this book, not listen to this guy. Now, some other books, the actual person will do it. And when they do it, it seems more credible to me.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And with this guy,
fiction, any other people can do that. But when it's like a memoir or their story, it's going to be so much more powerful if they do it.
And you've been doing that for how long, the copywriting?
Gosh,
I'm sorry, ghostwriting in that.
that's okay. I started as a copywriter. We talked about that too. Ghostwriting. I guess I started 15 years ago or
Oh,
so.
good
It
for you. You've been
evolved
doing that.
into that. And I started just kind of helping people. You know, it came from your brochure is your story. I told that to, and then you had this book that you wanted to do. And so I have worked with a lot of different people in a lot of different capacities. And I've worked with, there's a publisher, sometimes like somebody connects me with a publisher and they might have 2 or 3, hey, this client needs help, that client needs help. Or they just introduce me to somebody and I work with them on my own. But I think for me, one of the biggest compliments, it was a fairly recent, it was about 2 years ago, maybe a year and a half ago. There was some reviews on this person's book who I ghost wrote it for them. And they said, I can tell he wrote this himself because it sounds just like him.
Oh, nice. I see
And I
where
was
that's
like,
from. Yeah.
score, that's what I want. It's not my story.
And you kind of
And
hang out with those people so you can kind of get a feeling for the way
yeah,
they
I
think.
like I said, I spend a lot of time because I can do it anywhere like this. I spend a
Yeah.
lot of time on Zoom or on the phone, or if they have a podcast or a blog or anything like that, they get that to me, and share certain things so that I can listen to them, and begin to understand their voice, but also the why behind. Because again, why are you doing this? What's your story? If I
Yeah.
don't understand that, it's not going to be authentic. And so that's the way that I work. And I always laugh because people go, well, who have you ghostwritten for? Can't tell you, because that's the whole point. And some people will maybe thank me in their acknowledgments. They may not.
Yeah.
They don't say why. They just, oh, I'd like to thank Mavis Lamb. So if you ever see that, probably I hope them write that book. But it's sort of like it's not for me to say. And some people actually sign an NDA.
Yeah, there's probably an NDA.
And I have no problem with that. I always say, as long as the check cleared,
Of course.
that's all the credit I need right there. But I have other people that loudly, I was at a book signing for somebody and I was introducing myself and they're like, oh, they've been talking about you and how you help them do this. So that person has no problem.
Yeah.
And in fact, has given me a referral saying, this person, she did my book and it was great and it sounded just like I had done it. And you need to talk to her to have them do your book. So that's their choice.
I tell you,
I
I have
don't
a
tell
book in
that.
my head that we'll talk about it offline, but and I've started it, and I would definitely need someone to go through it because I am not a writer. I think if I wrote faster and less good, it would get done.
I
Right.
hear you.
And then
Yes.
someone could clean it up. Because I think I get caught in some details and I'm like, I'm over explaining this. This person, whoever helped me, could figure out how to word that.
We've talked about this several times. Yeah. And I think that when I'm doing my own stuff, or even if I was writing for a client, when I used to do a lot of script writing, I did the same thing. I'd edit as I was writing, like, oh, that's not right. Oh, that's not
I
right.
know, I think I do
And
that.
you can't get past the first page,
I know.
So I invented for myself, and somebody said, oh, you should do a whole thing on that. I call it the benefit of draft zero. And what I mean by that is write and know that no one is ever going to see this. You don't have to send it to your client, and you can put notes in it so that when you got to that, am I over explaining this? I would just put that in parentheses. I think I've over explained this, or this is not the word I want, but I couldn't come up with the other word. And instead of stopping, going to this thesaurus, looking up a word or checking the meaning, I just keep writing. And I can put notes aside, like, just rewrite this later. This is the worst thing you've ever done. But anyway, back to the whatever I'm doing.
Yeah.
And then later I'll go back and I can edit. It's always easier to look at words on a page and edit than stare at a blank screen or a blank piece of paper. That can be quite overwhelming for people.
So the way this podcast started is we were at Thanksgiving at my daughter's house a couple of years ago, and she goes, you know what, Dad, you should do a podcast. This was during COVID. And I'm like, well, I don't really know what a podcast is. So I came home and I got with my mentor under 30, right? You always should have one of those with technology. And called him and he goes, oh, yeah, it's a piece of cake. I said, well, what if I screwed up? He just, fuck it. It doesn't matter. There's no rules. That's the great thing. You just do another one.
Yep.
So I have over 100 episodes, and I wish I had 500, but I need to get, do more marketing and things like that, and kind of either commit or get. So the why was to help younger people. First of all, know two things. One, you're going to turn 80 one day,
Yes.
right? It's hard to get a 16-year-old and say, you're going to be 20. They're like, no way, it's so far away.
It's so
Jeez,
far away.
I've been 23 times now, right?
Right.
And then to get them to understand that trauma is going to probably happen, how you're going to deal with it when it comes. And maybe you don't make as many mistakes as I did because you think about things a little longer or different things. So that was kind of how the direction was going. But my statistics, my demographics say I'm talking to people from 20 to 80. So,
sure,
which is fine. I don't care who listens, but I get kind of everybody all over the board. So, all right. So a question that I used to ask all my guests when I first started, and I thought it was going to be an easy question for people. It will be for you.
Oh, I hope so.
But I was very surprised I couldn't get straight answers all the time. Have you ever had anybody in your life that was a really good leader? Because we talk about leaders. I've talked about servant leadership, which is redundant. If you're a leader, you're in servitude to whoever you're leading.
Correct. If you're doing it well.
And it always drives me nuts when I see those two words. It's like a new buzzword, right? For the last couple of years, is servant leadership. And I started looking back at my life saying, man, I never really worked for or had a good leader that I felt like he was doing the right or she was doing the right things, whatever. Maybe my mom, but is there anybody that pops into your mind when I say that to you?
Specifically work or just life in general?
Any life in general.
So my dad was one of the best leaders.
Nice.
Ever.
Good.
And in such a way that he's gone now, but we would know what I'm one of four, and we all know if you ask Dad, what would he say? And we already know because he never really told us the answers. He helped us figure it out for ourselves.
Yeah, I kind of had parents like that.
Right. And so that was one of my first big leaders. And I saw him also lead by example of opening our home to people that needed a place to stay for a while. Busy executive, took time off to help coach my brother's football team at the small little private school because they had a coach, but they needed a lineman, and he'd gone to school. He'd gone on scholarship to play football. So he would get off work, he'd leave, and he'd go coach for no money just because he loved the kids and he wanted to help. I learned about how to give 100%. Like if you're going to do something, you do it all the way, or you don't do it. And I learned from him that wasn't like he used to say, if you're going to do something, don't do it at all. And I realized that wasn't an invitation not to do it at all. It's an invitation to do it right the first time.
Right.
So I would say definitely that. I had some amazing teachers who taught me.
That's the second question was, have you ever had a teacher that jumps out?
Yes. I had a teacher who I thought was the hardest teacher in the world. And I learned more from her than anyone else. And she taught me how to write a paper.
Oh, nice.
Like you don't know. I didn't realize that was a big deal until I transferred, because I moved around a lot. School, and we're seniors, and it's time to write our senior English paper. I had no idea how to get started. I'm like, but you do the thing with the tick and your body and the head, and you do that. No. She taught me how to write, how to look at things critically so that I could figure it out. Again, the leaders, they didn't never tell me how to do it really per se, like go do this. They taught me how to figure it out for myself.
Well, and that's what leaders should be doing, is
right.
Right. Yeah. Not telling you what. So Steve Jobs always said, we don't hire smart people and tell them what to do. We ask them what to do.
Yeah.
How do we do this better? That's why we're hiring and paying you all this money.
Yeah.
I love Steve Jobs, not his personal life. Obviously, no one would want to be him, but what a marketing brilliant genius, And I listen to him a lot when I can find snippets of him saying things, because he was that kind of person that said, look, we're going to make mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
We just want to, we want to make fewer of them, but the more mistakes we're making, the more forward we're moving. So yeah, it's funny. I never really had a leader. There was one man that ran an organization that I was a manufacturer's rep for that I really liked. Didn't know him personally, but the way he handled business, the guy was just like the best businessman. And I had a couple teachers that were okay, but my mom was my thing. My dad was a terrible father. I don't have any resentment against him. He was never trained to be a good father. He had a shitty, grew up shitty. But my mom taught me how to handle him or think about him and things like that. So I don't resent him in any way.
Right.
I'll tell you a funny story. I was a ring bearer in a wedding when I was 8 years old, and I just connected with the woman that got married. It was my mom's cousin. We had seen each other here or there, but we actually are getting back together as a family. My mom's gone, my dad's gone. And we were talking to her. This was the funniest thing. She goes, "Well, who was that drunk your mom was married to?" And I said, "Oh, that would have been my father." And she got embarrassed. I said, "No, don't be embarrassed. I'm sure the family thought of him like that,
Right.
he wasn't that." But it was just funny that she brought it up so bluntly. And I'm like, "Oh,
Right.
yeah, that'd been my dad." But
That would have been my dad.
she said, "Oh, I'm sorry." I said, "No, it's no big deal."
No, no. I think that when you talk about leaders, like who you've worked for, bosses, which should be great leaders, I probably, like most people, I learned more from the horrible bosses I had,
Yeah,
who
what not to
showed
do.
me how not to do, how not to treat employees, how not to do things. I mean, I still remember, I was in a production company in LA, and trust me, they knew that if you left, there were 20 people behind you wanting your job for less money. So there was no job security. But I remember they were looking for somebody. It was not a position that I would have been suited for. But I'm like, "Oh, you should consider Mark for that job because he's been doing ABC and he'd be so great." And she goes, "Well, we can't do that. We can't hire from within because if we did that, everybody would want a different job." Oh, okay.
I always
Is
tell the
that the
kids,
point?
Abraham Lincoln said, I learned from every man I ever met. What I learned mostly was what not to do, right?
What not to do.
I had three, you know, pretty long management tenures at point. And I still, from those 3 times, get people calling me back and said, "Man, I wish you were still here, Ed."
Mm-hmm.
Now, I wasn't great by any means. In fact, the book Good to Great is one of my favorite business books. And
Yeah.
I always thought I could never be a level 4 or 5 leader. 1, 2, or 3 I could probably handle. I just don't. First of all, I don't want to be a level 4 or 5. That's a different personality than me.
Sure.
But and it's not bad. It's just I'd be better at 1, 2, or 3. And I try to encourage my kids and people to read that book, but the first couple of chapters are hard to get through because it's statistical.
Yeah.
But I said, you just got to get through that, because once you get to the meat of the book, it's a really good book. And but I don't know, man. So I'm 61. I'll be 62 next year. I grew up in the 80s, 70s, 80s, all that. And we had bosses that said, if you do your job, we'll let you keep it, right? That was the way they
Yeah.
managed back then. Things have
Right.
changed dramatically since that time. Maybe too dramatically at some level, because we always forget to go, "Oh, by the way, we are paying you to do this."
Yeah. You'd
we,
still
we
have to
don't have
show
to.
up and do the thing that we hired you to
Yeah,
do.
we want to be nice to you and we want you to take some time off, but not the second day, right? Need you to kind of learn the job. But some of our youth don't get that. And it's funny, when you go back, we were talking about how the millennials and stuff. I have more problem now with people my age that don't want to do anything than some of these millennials I meet. Some of these millennials are brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
And they're good workers and they do all those things. It's the attitude that the people have been poisoned their whole life and they just they're cynical and everything else. Those are the
Yes.
ones that bother me almost more
Yeah.
now.
Yeah. I know. No, when you talk about uh management styles, and I go back to my dad because I found out that he didn't just do that for his children. He
Oh, I
was a
wouldn't
good,
imagine he did.
he was a great boss. And one of the first things he did was a big pulp and paper company, and they had what they were going to call the training center. And my dad said, "No, we're not going to call it that." And they're like, "What do you mean?" He said, "It's our education and development
Right.
center." He said, "You train dogs, you educate people." And he created this whole concept that was just a shift in words. We've talked about words a little earlier: get to, have to. And the other thing he did is he had started a program called the ABC program, and it was advancement by competency, so that you got your regular annual review, and if you did well, you might get the raise. But if you wanted to become more valuable to the company, you would learn a new skill. And so they would go to what we called the EDC, Education Development Center, and they would take some course or learn a new skill. And it was some of it physical, like learning how to weld, and some of it was other more business, leadership type things. And if you passed that, then you automatically got an advance in
But he
pay.
was kind of a pioneer in some of that too, or was learning those pioneer
Yeah,
skills. Yeah.
because this was back in the 80s,
Yeah.
this was back in the day. And he really helped me understand that it comes back to, how do I treat people? What do I expect of them? If I expect it of myself, if I will do it, don't ask anybody to do anything you wouldn't do yourself, that
Yeah.
kind of thing. But yeah, just really helping people figure those things out. I think that to this day, those kind of people will be the better leaders, because
Oh,
they're
I
willing to,
totally agree.
do the work, and then let's do it together. And I don't know everything, and you're better at that than me. There's nothing more empowering, I think, for a supervisor of some level to say, well, you're better at that than I am, so you do that. They're like,
I
oh,
think it's almost, I think it should almost be calculated at times to do that. You do
mhm,
that with your kids. I hope people would do that with their kids.
yeah,
And I acknowledge when my kids, my daughters, well, a couple of them are much better at some things than I am, emotionally,
absolutely,
things like that, right?
yeah,
And I will have no problem telling them that. Something when going back to COVID, my wife smiles at people. We both smile at people quite a bit. We're in the grocery store. That was one of the things that really bothered her about having to wear a mask, is she couldn't, you can kind of see her smile in her eyes, right? But that was
mhm,
really tough when you're in a store and everybody looks grumpy, right? Because all you can see are these
yes.
little slits.
All you see is these little,
Yeah.
you know,
That was a hard thing socially for her. And she's not as social as me when like we go out somewhere. I'm usually the one doing the talking, you could probably
hmm,
tell. Um, but yeah, that's one of the things that really bothered her, was the inability to just kind of smile at somebody and make their day, or
yeah.
say something nice to them, because they're like, what? What? Trying to talk to a mask all the time.
Right. And you can't hear anymore because for some reason, when we put the mask on, we can't hear. Um, probably because we all read lips more than we realized, we assumed we knew what people were saying. But I think that that's a piece that people are just now getting back comfortable with, of smiling at somebody I don't know, saying hi, nice day, whatever. We've some people are still like, don't talk to me. I have this wall,
Yeah.
and that's okay. I'm not saying everybody has to be the social butterfly, but we've lost, and we have to relearn, how do we get along in the world together, in a real space, in the grocery store, on the plane. Wow, we've really lost it in the air. Um, just that civility, that, I what is that? If in a world where you can be anything you want, be kind,
Right, right.
and people have
I
lost
just
that.
posted that the other day, I think. I think I
Yeah,
just
I think
posted
you
that.
did. Maybe that's where I
It's
recently
actually
saw it.
free to be nice, right? Well, Mavis, you're awesome. I want to talk to you more at another time. You're going to stay on for a minute after I stop this, but I think we covered what we wanted to cover this time. I think we could probably do, if we wanted to do a more structured podcast, if you have the time. I know you're busy, you've got stuff to do. I think it'd be awesome, and I think it'd be a good way for you to sell your business too. To talk a little bit more about your business. But I tell you, I know when we had that conversation, we were very much in line with a lot of things. And
Absolutely.
I was saying to somebody about that COVID thing, they're like, "No, I don't agree with that." I said, "Well, I don't. You don't have to agree. I'm just telling you, this is what my perception is." And I used to be in the business of getting people in a room to network. And
Hmm.
when I go to these chamber events now, they're not the same.
It
The first
isn't.
problem with the chambers are doing everything they did in the 70s, right? I'm surprised they don't call them sundowners anymore, like our parents called them, but they need to, kind of get a little bit more into 2023 with these mixers. They're just kind of
Yes.
stagnant.
Right.
And the problem with me is that I can only sell, moving services, corporate moving services, to so many, insurance agents and realtors.
Right.
I don't even deal with them in business. So that's where I kind of find them falling down a little bit. So is there
Yeah.
anything you want to plug? Have you written a book?
Um, you know what? My cool book that I have to say is The Big Book of Martinis for Moms. Who doesn't want to read that book? It's
I tell people all the time, I'm like, you wonder why I think, Sarah, are you buying more alcohol? I said, I have 8 kids.
yeah.
You, you think I got to
There's
give you
not
any excuse
enough.
why to drink? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's a fun book. It's full of a bunch of recipes, and you don't have to be a mom to enjoy it.
Of
I
course.
figure most of us had a mom at some point, so we can still read it. And it's just little feats and little things that moms accomplish, and then there's a drink reward that goes along with it. And that was, first of all, it's a fun book to read, but it was a blast to write, to
Oh
get
yeah, I
to
bet.
live it. So that's a really fun one. And maybe when I come back, we'll talk about. I've got another book that's I'm not quite finished with yet, called Napping in the Lap of God.
Oh, interesting. So you were not to keep this moving because we all need to get back to whatever. Your dad was a religious man.
Not overly religious, but yes.
Were you
Yes, we
churchgoers as
we were
children?
churchgoers. We went to church pretty much every Sunday. He traveled a lot, but yeah, we went to
Okay.
church every Sunday. Hmm.
And he was in the paper business, you said?
Yes.
In what state? That's all you got to tell me.
Well, we moved around a lot. We were corporate brats, not army brats. Started in Washington State and then went to North Carolina and then Mississippi.
Oh, those make sense. Yeah.
So Pine
So I used
Tree
to travel
Land.
to Wisconsin a lot, and they had a big paper mills there too. When I was repping HVAC products. So,
Oh yeah.
all right, Mavis, you're awesome. I'll keep following you on. I'm going to send you all the information for this, but let me just do an outro here, and then we'll chat. So
Okay.
this is Ed Franklin. Thank you very much, Mavis Lamb. She has a website. I'll get you all that on the link. Like I said, she's going to be on here again. And I want to remind you, you can contact me at edfranklin.nolimits@gmail.com, or you can go to my website at no limits, Ed Franklin, no limits, no dots, .com. And I will see you all soon, and have a great day.